For those of you who know Kevin, he needs no introduction. For those of you that don't, some have called him the world's most famous computer hacker. He's had several books written about him, a movie made about him. He's the author of several books, with a new one that came out this week, which is a tell-all. His story, in short, is, I'll leave the details to you, but he basically hacked into several Fortune 500 companies, government agencies, phone companies, then spent 3 years on the run, and then finally got caught and spent 5 years behind bars. So with that, a warm welcome to Kevin Mitnick.
Thank you, Aaron.
So, I mean, how does one become the world's most famous computer hacker?
Wow, that takes a lot of doing. Actually, I started as a 10-year-old. I was fascinated with magic, and I loved doing magic tricks. And then in high school, I was introduced to a student who could do magic with the telephone system. And he's what they call the phone freak. And I don't know, how many of you read 2600 magazine? So you got a few of you in here. So phone freaking was like the predecessor to hacking. And I was just like taken aback with what this kid could do. I gave him my mom's name, and he was able to get our unlisted telephone number at home. He gave me this special number that you would call. You'd call this secret number, and you'd hear like a weird tone. You'd put in 5 digits, and then you can call anywhere in the world for free. Not that I had to call anyone, but I liked calling the time in Australia because I thought it was cool. And at the time, I thought it was a fluke with the telephone system, but it actually probably was some poor soul's MCI account. And just all the cool stuff he could do with the phone. So I was a prankster, and I loved pulling cool tricks. So the first thing that I did was I changed a friend's class of service to that of a payphone. So whenever he or his parents tried to make a call, it would say, "Please deposit a dime." They'd actually get this recording. I actually have the recording on my iPhone. So you imagine you're at home. You go to make a call, and this is what you hear.
The call you have made requires a 10-cent deposit. Please hang up momentarily. Listen for dial tone. Deposit 10 cents and dial your call again.
And
so I was really into like pulling pranks with the telephone system, and that was my passion, was really just to learn all about telephony. And then when the phone companies started switching over to electronic switching systems, that's when they had front-end computers that were involved, and that's why I became interested in hacking. Actually, I didn't even want to go to learn about computers. I had a friend in high school that says, "Hey, you would really love computer class." And then I talked to the instructor, and I said, "Hey, I'd like to take a computer class." And he asked me what my prerequisites, what classes I had done before, and I didn't have calculus, and I didn't have some other prerequisites, so he says, I couldn't get it. So then then my friend was there, and he goes, "Show him some of the tricks you can do with the telephone." And then, okay, we're going to let you in, we're going to waive the prerequisites, and probably that was, probably he's regretting that today, because of all the crazy stuff I did. I mean, the first thing I used to do is like dial up to USC, so I could play their computer games, because they had better games than they did in high school. And they had an Olivetti terminal, an acoustic coupler, 110 baud modem. So you can imagine 110 baud. Any of you had computed at those, dialed up at those super fast speeds? In any event, they had a phone in the room, so it was restricted. You couldn't dial out. So what I used to do is call the operator and say, "Hi, this is Mr. Christ. I need you to connect me to this number," and that would be the dial-up for SC. So after he figured out what was going on, because all the kids in class were playing computer games on USC's computers, because they actually had a much better gaming library, he brought in a phone lock. And he says, "I found the one thing that's going to stop Kevin from dialing up to USC." He proudly places the phone lock in the one, because a rotary phone in number 1. And I go, "Hey, that's cool. How much did that cost you?" And he goes, "Oh, like $5, $6, $7. And I said, "Let me show you a cool trick." So of course, I asked him for a phone number, and I just simply pulsed out on the switch hook, the number I wanted to dial. His face turns red, and he actually threw the phone across the room.
But you were quite the prankster anyhow. I mean, most kids, in their adolescent days go, toilet papering houses.
Yeah.
You had your other.
Mine was electronics.
To tell us like the McDonald's story. I mean.
Oh my God, that's kind of my favorite hack of all time, is taking over the drive-up window at McDonald's. So you could imagine the fun you could have at 16, 17 years old. I used to, my friends and I would sit like across a busy street in Los Angeles. I don't know if you know the area. It's like Ventura Boulevard. It's like it's huge. It's like Broadway here. And when customers would drive up, I had a ham radio that I modified that I can go on McDonald's frequencies, so I could actually take over the drive-up window. So the guy with the headset inside, he could hear what's going on, right? But was powerless to do anything. So people would drive forward. I'd take their order. They'd ask for a Big Mac, large fry, large Coke, and say, "Hey, man, we don't serve burgers here anymore. You have to go down to Taco Bell," and stuff like that. But the better one is when the cops drove up. Because I see the cops go up and I go, "Oh, hide the cocaine, hide the cocaine." And then, 16, 17, you're a little bit immature. So,
You think?
just a little. So a customer drive up, place their order. "Yeah, I'm sorry, sir, our ice machine's broken, but in lieu of sodas, we're giving out free apple juice. And would you like small, medium, or large?" And they'd always say large, right, because it's free. And then we had a recording of what sounded like urinating in a cup. "Would you please drive forward, sir?" And of course, at one time, it got too much for the guy, the manager at McDonald's. And he's out of the store. He's walking around the parking lot looking to every car to see who the culprit is. He sees nothing because we're way across the street. And we're kind of laughing, really. Sitting there laughing. And then he walks up to the drive-up window speaker, and he places his head in the speaker like he's going to see something. And of course, I couldn't resist. I pressed down the mic. I go, "What the fuck are you looking at?" And this guy, he flew back like 25 feet, right? So that's actually my favorite hack, is McDonald's. So.
But earlier on, you got caught even for some of those hacks, right?
Not for McDonald's. I got my first time really in trouble was we went dumpster diving at a Pacific Bell building, and then I decided to see if we could social engineer our way inside because we were very interested in this system at the phone company called Cosmos. And our objective there was just to go in there and like look at the manuals, try to see if we can get a few passwords. But we went a little overboard. We decided we're going to take some manuals out, copy them, and return them. But since it was so late at night,
To the dumpster?
no, we actually got into the building, and that's what I got in trouble for. Obviously, And we tried to return them, but then we were afraid to go back. So ended up getting into hot water for that.
What kind of hot water did you get into?
Oh well, like arrested. Actually, because somebody told on one of the friends of a friend told on us, and ended up. It's all in Ghost in the Wires. It was like, I remember when the police pulled me over. I was working in the San Fernando Valley. Is one of the district attorney actually showed up, and actually he's kind of a friend of mine now. Is Stephen Cooley. He's now the district attorney in Los Angeles County, and he's yelling to the guys, "Search the car for a logic bomb! Search the car for a logic bomb!" Because they thought it was like an explosive device when they didn't know it was a piece of code. So that was kind of like, okay.
But other than the final big arrest, you've had several run-ins with the law.
Unfortunately, yes. I was so passionate with hacking. It came to be like somewhat of an obsession for me. And it wasn't about stealing money or causing damage or writing viruses or worms. It was really about the thrill of getting in. And this thrill was, overpowering my common sense. And I ended up getting into some trouble. And then I started playing cat and mouse with the government. And at one point, I knew that the federal government was investigating me. So what I did is I hacked into the cellular phone company at the time, because back in those times you had wireline and wireless. And I found the cell phones that belonged to the FBI agents that were like watching me. So I decided I would watch them. So I had real-time access to the CDRs, to the call detail records, so I can kind of see who they're calling, who's calling them, where they physically were. And then at one point, I had this device that could monitor the cell site in my local area, and it would monitor the data channel. And this was on AMPS. This is not an AMPS. This is not GSM. This is the AMPS system. And anytime you pass into a cell site, your phone registers. Anytime you get a call, it does a page. and this is on the old AMP system. So I had all these FBI cell phone numbers, and I put them into my computer. Okay, so you had a scanner that's listening to the control channel, interfaced into this special box to a piece of software. So I can simply program in a list of phone numbers, and if those phone numbers ever register in that cell site, it alerts me. So one morning I go to work. I was working as a private investigator. I go into work.
We see the irony there.
So I go into work. I put in the code to disable the alarm to the office, and I still hear this beeping sound. And I hear beep, beep, beep. And I start walking in the hall towards my office, and it's getting louder. And I go, what the hell's going on? Did somebody bug my office? And I'm going to, and then I finally go up to the computer, and it's actually the alarm, my FBI alarm, that there was an agent in the area. So I realized I was like the main guy that was like hunting for me. And I realized that he actually called a payphone across the street from the apartment I was at. Now, I slept home. I was there at the time, so I knew it. Well, if they didn't come to arrest me, did they come to follow me? And then I thought, oh, maybe they came to search. So, you know, of course, I cleaned up my apartment, and because I didn't want to leave anything they'd be interested in. And then the next day, I thought to go to Winchell's Donuts. So I got a big box of donuts, and I wrote FBI Donuts on it and put it in the refrigerator with a note on the refrigerator that I had donuts for them. So the next day they actually came and searched, and they were pretty unhappy.
Did they take any donuts?
They didn't eat any donuts, though. I don't know why. Maybe they thought I poisoned them or something. So as a kid, I just did these crazy things. I was mostly interested in hacking telephone systems, really as a trophy. So I'd try to compromise switches in all these different areas just to see if I could do it. It wasn't really, I ended up pull pranks. And then I started moving on. I wanted to learn about how to become a better hacker. So I would get access to source code, like a VMS source code, that DEC had developed. So I could analyze it for security vulnerabilities, so I could find holes that would make me more adept at compromising those systems. So it's more like hacking into the companies, get the source code, leverage the information to become a better hacker. Yeah.
But in reading the book earlier on, you also took interest in creating false identities, almost like you knew what was coming on.
Well, not really. This was when I was 11 years old. I always like to know things that you shouldn't know. And there was this book.
Keep an eye on them.
Yeah, there was this bookstore in Los Angeles called the Survival Bookstore, and they had books on lockpicking, on creating new identities. I mean, just all the secret underground stuff. And then they actually sold lockpick sets. And I remember you had to be 18 years or older to buy a lockpick set. So one of the books that I bought at the Survival Bookstore showed where you could mail away and get a false ID that said you're 18. I'm 12. So I get a false ID that I'm 18. I go to the lady at the same store, and I go, oh, I'm 18. She looks at it, she laughs. She goes, okay, Kevin. Gives me my lockpick set. But so I learned, at a very young age, of how the system works and the holes in it. There's this book called The Paper Trip by a guy named Barry Reed that described how to create new identity in America and disappear. So but I never expected I'd have to use it later. I just wanted to know how.
So when did you start using that knowledge?
Oh, when in about 1992, right after the FBI donuts thing.
And one of the first identities that you picked was Eric Weiss.
Yes, Eric Weiss, because my idol at the time was a man named Harry Houdini, and his real name was Eric Weiss. So at the time, I was living in Denver, Colorado, and I had to get a job, because I was running from the government at the time, and I had to get a job, and I needed a legitimate identity, so I chose Eric Weiss. And I found out later, I had a sense of humor, but much later I found out the FBI had no sense of humor. So this is when I did one of the attacks that I discussed in the book was on Motorola, and and I forgot to bring something. I just remembered. I wish I could have shown you the brochure for this thing called the MicroTac Ultralight. And this thing was like the iPhone of today, this device. I don't know if you remember these Star Trek type flip phone cell phones. And as a hacker, I wanted to understand how it worked. I wanted to know, the internal protocols, how the firmware was put together. So I made a very stupid and regrettable decision. I decided to go after the source code for the handset. So one afternoon, I left the office early in Denver. I called the toll-free number, for 800 directory assistance, and I asked for Motorola. And I was given the number, and I called the number, got a receptionist, and I said, hey, I'm looking for the project manager of the Microtac Ultralight project. And the nice lady told me that all the cellular development was handled out of Schaumburg, Illinois. So she goes, would you like that number? I go, certainly. She gave me that number. I call the Schaumburg receptionist, and I tell her I'm looking for the project manager of the Microtac Ultralight project. And I'm transferred around 2, 3, 4, about 8 times. I'm talking to different people, and then I end up talking to the vice president of all of research and development for Motorola cell phones, all their mobility. And I say, hey, I'm looking for the project manager of the Microtac project. This is Rick over in Arlington Heights. Because during the last 8 calls, I found out they actually had an Arlington Heights facility. And he goes, sure. He gave me her phone number and says, well, can I help you with anything? And I said, no, I'll just talk to Pam. Because Pam was the lady that was the project manager. So I call Pam, and I don't get her. I get her voicemail outgoing greeting saying that she just left on a 2-week vacation, the date she was returning, and she said on her voicemail, if you need any help with anything whatsoever, please call Alicia on extension blah, blah, blah. Who's my next call to, right? I call Alicia. I go, hey, Alicia, this is Rick over in Arlington Heights. I'm looking, I go, wait a second, did Pam leave on vacation yet? Because when I spoke to her, last week, she said she might be going on vacation. Oh, she has. Well, before she left, she promised to send me the source code to the Microtac Ultralight. And I was walking. Now imagine I'm already walking home. I live 20 minutes away by walking from the law firm, and it was snowing that day. So as I'm walking through traffic, I'm trying to press the cell phone really tight to my ear so you can't hear all the traffic, because I never expect this to work because it's all extemporaneous. And then Alicia goes, well, Rick, what version do you want? And I didn't even know the version numbers because, again, this was all off the cuff. And I just go, how about the latest and the greatest? So she's fishing around on the computer. I could hear her typing. I'm trying to walk out of traffic onto side streets. And she goes, Rick, I found the latest source code release with Stock 2, but there's a problem. I go, what's the problem? She goes, well, there's lots of directories and there's tons of files in each directory. And I go, do you know how to use tar and gzip? And she goes, no, I don't. I said, would you like to learn? And she said, yes. So I became her instructor for the day, and I taught her how to use tar and gzip. And at the end of the lesson, there was a 3 megabyte file of the source code I wanted to look at. So of course, my next question was, do you know what FTP is? She goes, file transfer program. I go, yes, exactly. And then as I'm walking, I go, because I didn't prepare for this, is I couldn't give her, oh, my host name is hacker at colorado.edu, right? So I actually had to I remembered an IP address to a server that I had a bunch of accounts on, and I gave her the IP address. She tries connecting 2, 3, 4, 5 times, times out each time, and then she goes, Rick, I go, yeah. She goes, I need to talk to my security manager about what you're asking me to do. I go, no, because she's already putting me on hold, because that's the last person. I didn't want her to talk to someone like Eran. That'd be bad. So I'm walking, and the time is like, the seconds feel like minutes, and I'm really nervous. They're gonna record my call. And so I was very careful when she, was gonna return to the line. I was going to be not saying words. I was just gonna be, try to feel it out. So about 5 minutes later, she comes back on the line. She goes, Rick, I talked to my security manager about what you want me to do. I go, that IP address you gave me is outside of Motorola's campus. Notice I'm not talking. She goes, and we need to use a special proxy server to send these files. And I don't have an account on the proxy server. But my security manager was kind enough to give me his personal username and password to send you the file. So within 15, 20 minutes, I had the source code to the Microtac Ultralight. All I really did was look at it because I was, curious how it worked out. What I really wanted to do at the time, since the government was chasing me, I wanted to create invisibility. So if I had the firmware, I could actually modify it, because how AMPS worked that day is you can control the registration and the paging processes, and I wanted to have better control so I couldn't easily be tracked. But like a company like Motorola had all the best technology money can buy, and it was an extemporaneous attack that actually worked. I was really surprised. Yeah.
So let's fast forward to actually getting caught.
Oh, okay.
What was ultimately the demise that got you caught?
Well, actually, there was a guy, Satomu Shimomura, that became involved because his server was hacked, and this guy is kind of an arrogant security expert. If you Google him, you'll find out who he was. And we wanted to take him a couple notches down. It was more of that type of thing. And then he went on a vigilante mission, and he and the FBI actually teamed up to capture me. And they ended up, in the long run, they ended up actually going out with radio direction finding gear and tracing the cellular signal to determine my whereabouts, because I was in a fixed location in Raleigh, North Carolina, because I just moved there, and I underestimated the amount of time that the government worked, because ordinarily they're quite slow, and they were able to trace the signal, and then I get it, and then I was just, and they were able to trace the signal, and then the night this happened, I actually was out. I was actually going to work out at the gym that night. And I arrived home late around, I don't know about, no, I went to go eat dinner. I arrived home around 11:30 that night, something like that, 11:30 or 12. And by that time, the FBI has this whole apartment building under surveillance because they believe the signal was on the other side of the complex, North Carolina. So I just parked my car. I have no idea that it's all full of feds. I go up to my apartment, and the story's in the book. There's a lot more to this, but I'm just trying to cut to the chase. And then I just had a gut feeling that something was wrong. I just had this nagging gut feeling. So I opened the door around 1 in the morning, and I peered out into the parking lot, and I just go, I must be being paranoid. And I shut the door. Me opening the door and looking out was how they actually found me, because they couldn't track the signal because the signals were bouncing. And then I get a knock on the door, and it's 1:30, and to me, I keep hackers hours. I stay up late and I sleep late, and I my reaction was, who is it? And it was FBI, open up. And I go, who are you looking for? They go, are you Kevin Mitnick? I go, no. I go check the mailboxes downstairs because you have the wrong apartment. And they left for about 10 minutes. And at that time, in that 10 minutes, I'm on the second story. I'm looking for a rope to go down the other side of my patio to get the hell out of there. And there was nothing, I didn't prepare, so I didn't have a rope, and I wasn't going to tie bed sheets together because I didn't want to, get shot on the way down. So they knocked again, and I was already on the phone with my family and with an attorney, and they're knocking, and I go, they go, are you Kevin Mitnick? I already told you I'm not. It's 1:30 in the morning. You have the wrong apartment, And then he goes, well, open up. We want to talk to you. I crack the door. All these agents pour in, they start searching, and they asked me for a driver's license. I go, here I am, because I was under a new name, and they start searching. I'm asking where their search warrant is, and they're just ignoring me. And eventually, it gets to the point. This is going on for a long time. They're searching my apartment. They really didn't find much, and they finally were asking again, "Are you Kevin Mitnick?" I said, "No, I just showed you my driver's license. I'm not this guy Mitnick." And then they handed me a wanted poster of myself and said, "Doesn't that look like you?" So I take the wanted poster and I'm looking at it, I study it, and I'm thinking to myself, could I really get out of this? Right? And I'm looking at it, and I finally go, no, that doesn't look anything like me, and I hand it back. So eventually this thing is going on for a while. One of these agents opens a briefcase on my desk, unlocks the briefcase, and he's about to go through it. And I had some very important papers in there, like blank birth certificates I didn't want him to find. I figured that'd be suspicious. So I went over to the table because I wasn't under arrest. And I said, hey. And he looks up. I slam the briefcase down. I lock it. And he goes, and his face turned red, of course. And he took the briefcase to the kitchen because he was going to use a carving knife to actually open it up. And then the other agent stopped him because it would be a legal search, right, to open up the container. So then finally the FBI went to go get a search warrant. And then during that process, they found a wallet, and then they found a pay stub in the name of Kevin Mitnick because I had a ski jacket that I had a pay stub from like 1980 something that I inadvertently left in there. And then they finally arrested me. So it was like this whole 3.5 hour ordeal. And I was trying to get out of it. And at one point before they found it, they said, well, you know what? We're not sure if you're Mitnick or not. So we're going to take you down to the FBI and fingerprint you. And then we're going to compare the fingerprint records to rule out that you're, Mitnick. I said, why didn't you think of that before? We could have saved all this time. In fact, tell me what time you want me to show up at your office tomorrow and you can fingerprint me. I tried my best. It didn't work. But the craziest thing is I think is the time that when I was in court and they had told the judge that not only do they have to detain me, but because I'm a national security threat, that they actually have to keep me away from the phone. And the reason they had to keep me away from the phone is I could pick up the phone and I could whistle the launch codes to start a nuclear war. So I'm serious. So I actually laughed in court, right? Because I figured the prosecutor was going to lose all credibility with the judge. Unfortunately, the judge bought it, and I ended up, in solitary confinement for 8.5 years. So during this time in solitary confinement, I perfected how I could whistle the launch codes, and I want to share that with all of you today. Okay? Now I need a phone because if I'm going to connect to NORAD, I need some connectivity. So I'm going to connect to the phone here. So give me a second. And what we're going to do here now, you might have to take cover. I'm sorry. New York's gone. No. But, I mean, the timing was wrong in that, but I thought that would be funny. But, yeah, so back then when I was involved in hacking, I mean, it was all mysterious. The internet wasn't really so popular as it is today. They looked at you like as a witch, like a dark, magician or warlock, and they had such fear that people actually believed you could whistle the launch codes. So
That wasn't the only myth that was made about you, right? I mean, you have several.
Oh yeah, I mean, there's just so many. I mean, oh yeah, that I hacked into NORAD and nearly started World War III. That's actually was stated as fact in the New York Times. And that was actually from a movie called War Games in 1983. Yeah, but I was under this severe, I was in high security in federal prison during this, when I was detained, and I was in what they call the hole. And this was a solitary confinement. So if you're like the Mexican mafia, if you're, Al Capone, if you're Killick prison guard, they put you in this place that you're just under 24-hour lockdown. And I had a special phone restriction that I was only allowed to call like 5 people: my mom, my grandmother, my aunt, my attorney. And so I figured, I'm kind of at the bottom of the bucket here in solitary confinement in a federal detention center, but that didn't stop me from phone hacking. Not at all.
So you were hacking from prison.
Hacking from prison. Let me tell you how. Is whenever I had to make a phone call, they would actually shackle my arms, shackle my legs. They'd walk me like 30 feet to this room that had a bank of payphones. And the guard would look at, the numbers I can call. He'd say, which number do you want, Mitnick? And he would dial 0 plus the number because it was a collect call, obviously. And he'd place his chair 4 feet away from the payphones. So he'd just sit there, and his eyes would never move from what I'm doing. And the handset cord on the payphone was a little bit longer than it is like on the street. I guess they're longer in federal prison, who knows. So I'd walk back and forth when I was talking, and I would constantly be scratching my back, switching phones, just getting him used to this behavior, scratching my back, and actually rub my back against the payphone. And then I figured when I ended the call, I acted like I was still talking to the person that he dialed. And I just, keep talking. I'd be rubbing my back, and then behind my back, I would just hang up, push down the switch hook. And then I'd move my hand to the front because I knew that I had 18 seconds before the phone went into reorder, meaning beep, 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 beep. So I had 18 seconds to do this. So I just continued to scratch, and then I put my hand behind again and dial 0 plus the number I wanted because I was able to dial the touch tone behind my touch tone pad. I was able to dial a phone number behind my back. And then I'd have to continue in the conversation because I knew within 30 seconds the operator was going to come on the line and ask who the call was from. So I'd have to say, well, tell Uncle Harry that Kevin says hi. And when I said Kevin, that's when the operator is asking who the call's from. So this is how I was able to call anyone I wanted, even though I was in plain sight of this this officer. And this was working for like 3 weeks. And then early one morning, my door opens, and it's like the executives of the prison. They put me in handcuffs. They take me to this like attorney-client visiting room, and they sit me down. And the captain of the prison goes, "Mitnick, how you doing it? How you redialing the phone?" I go, "What are you talking about? Our officer is watching every move you make, and somehow you're redialing the phone." I said, "Hey guys, I'm not David Copperfield." Because I wasn't going to admit to anything. Then they say, "Well, we're monitoring everything you do downstairs," which I knew they were. And I just said, maybe there's a failure in your monitoring system, because it's still, I'm not going to admit anything because then they could use it against you. So a couple days later, I hear some commotion outside the door, and I peek out, and it's Pacific Bell, and they're installing a phone jack across the corridor from where my room was. And I'm thinking, are these guys actually going to install a phone in my room and then try to restrict who I can call? That's going to be fun. And I found out what happened after is they actually, next time I make a call, the guard brings a phone, he plugs it in, he dials the number I want, then he puts the hand cord through this like trap door in the door. So I only have the handset. I can't touch the touch tone pad. It's beyond the locked door. And then I'm having a flashback to Hannibal Lecter and Silence of the Lambs. So that was crazy. They were so embarrassed by this, they never told the court. So the court never found out that I was calling anybody that I wanted to, because they would look like fools.
Let's talk a little bit about, finally getting out, the Free Kevin movement.
Oh, yeah, well, I mean, a lot of stuff was happening in my case. Like I was detained for 4.5 years without trial, and and a lot of civil liberties issues. So then 2600 Magazine actually started this Free Kevin movement to kind of, like, why is this guy denied the ability to help his lawyer look at the evidence? Why has he been held for so many years, in custody without a trial? So they started this whole Free Kevin movement, and it was, and I couldn't believe this. One day I was in my room in detention, and I look out this, like they have the slitted window, and I look out, and I heard they were having Free Kevin protests that day, and I look and I see an airplane flying like a puddle jumper, and it was pulling a Free Kevin banner on an airplane, and I could see this from my prison cell. So I was like, kind of like, wow, like I never expected this. And anyway, they were trying to get the word out to, it wasn't like the Free Kevin movement was saying, hey, this guy shouldn't be punished for his hacking. It was more like, why is he held detained for so long? Why is the judge not allowing his lawyers to look at the evidence? So it was kind of to get the word out, and they did a good job of it, and ultimately, did it help my case? No, because the government doesn't care really about, protests. But eventually I made a deal with the government after, the reason I made the deal is I found this case. Since I was hacking for more curiosity, I wanted to look at the source code to become a better hacker. It wasn't about selling the source code. It wasn't about, doing anything with it, but using it to leverage it to hack in. And I found this case called this IRS agent called Richard. His name is Richard Sabinski, and he was doing the same thing. He was working for the IRS, but actually looking up people's tax returns because he was curious. He wanted to know how much money they made and all this sort of thing. And he was prosecuted for the same crimes that I was. And he actually appealed his case, and this was a federal case, saying, well, he did it out of curiosity. He didn't sell the information. He didn't disclose it to anybody. It was a case of curiosity, and the federal appellate court said, well, if you didn't use or disclose the information, it's not a federal crime. So I actually wanted to go to trial, saying, hey, I did all this hacking. You're right. I admit everything, but I did it for this purpose. Was more my curiosity and learning. It wasn't about using or disclosing it for monetary gain. And my lawyer told me that the federal prosecutor at the time warned him that if your client doesn't take a deal, we're gonna try him here. Let's say we lose. We're just going to move them to this jurisdiction and try them there. We don't care if we win or lose because we'll keep your client in custody so long that it won't matter anyway.
Because you've hacked in many jurisdictions.
Right. Well, when you're doing, when you're hacking over dial-up, I mean, this was dial-up in these days over the internet. You're going through so many different jurisdictions. They could just put you on the bus for this ever-ending, series of trials. So I just figured, hey, I wanted to settle it on the best terms possible. And one big negotiating point is they didn't want me to tell my story for life. In fact, another hacker named Kevin Polson, who recently wrote a great book called Kingpin. He's an editorial. I think he's the editorial director of Wired.com, and his deal is he can't write his story for life, right? And so my attorney negotiated, and it was 7 years. For 7 years, I was pretty much blacked out from being able to tell my story, and that expired in 2007. Then I teamed up with this awesome co-author. His name is Bill Simon, and he's actually here today in his audience with his girlfriend. He's right over here, Bill. Why don't you come up here and say hi to everybody? Okay, he doesn't want to come up to stage, but this book would have not been possible without Bill. I mean, Bill put up with my hacker's hours for 2 years. I mean, Bill's the type of guy that rises at 6, has breakfast at 7, and he's hard at work at 8. I'm going to bed at 8. But we finally got it done, and I thank Bill because without him, the book Ghosts in the Wires would not be here for all of you to read. And so thank you, Bill. I appreciate your hard work.
Now, not only not being able to tell your story for 7 years, you also had some other restrictions as part of your release.
Oh yeah, I couldn't touch a transistor. Anything with a transistor in it was restricted. The federal government was so, I don't know if they were scared or if they were trying to punish me or what the reason was, but anything with electronics I wasn't allowed to touch without their permission. So even to use a fax machine. And then after 2 years, it was really interesting because I was commissioned to write Art of Deception, again with Bill, which was my first book on social engineering. And what had happened is I called the probation department saying, hey, I was researching word processors that have no way to connect to a modem, no way to connect to the internet, just like standalone. And I spent like a couple weeks researching this stuff, and then I presented the case to the probation department. Hey, I could use this word processor, so I could work on this book with my co-author. And the probation officer said, hey, Kevin, we're going to let you get a laptop. What? Yeah, they're going to let me get a laptop. They allowed me to get a laptop under 2 conditions. 1 is I don't tell the media. That was the biggest condition. 2 is I don't connect to the internet. So then I was able to finally write, Art of Deception with Bill. I mean, there's just so many stories to tell. I don't know where you. I mean, it's just crazy. So.
One last one, and then we'll open up to questions. Through the book, it's pretty obvious that you have an addiction to hacking.
I would call it an extreme passion. I mean, that's what drove me. I mean, I remember when I was in my younger years, this is how, I guess, passionate I was, is when I was young, my parents couldn't afford a computer. Oh, and let me remind you how I started off on this path, is when I went to, my first programming assignment in high school was to write a Fortran program to find the first 100 Fibonacci numbers. And I thought that was a boring assignment. So I thought it would be cooler to write a program to steal everyone's password. Just for the fun of it. And what we had at school was an Olivetti 110 baud terminals, acoustic coupler modems, and we had a PDP-11, I think it was like an 1134 running RISC-to-SEED in downtown Los Angeles. And so all the students used VT100 terminals to connect to the school's computer. So I wrote a program that would be a login simulator, kind of like a phishing tool. So people would think they're logged out. They would type in hello. It'd ask them to put in their username and password. It would log them in. This was my first program, the first one that I ever wrote. It wasn't hello world. It was I'm going to steal your password. So I worked really hard on it because I had to do syscalls, interact with the operating system. It wasn't as easy as finding the first 100 Fibonacci numbers. And because I spent so much time on this assignment, I wasn't able to finish or even start the Fibonacci assignment. So it was due. So the teacher goes, Kevin, where's your assignment? I let you into class. I waived your prerequisites, and you're not even holding your weight here. I said, well, I was busy working on this other program. Let me show you how it works. So I showed him the program of stealing passwords. And he goes, that's awesome. And he gave me an A. That's awesome. He actually showed it to everyone else in class. Look what Kevin did. And I got all these attaboys. So the ethics taught when I was in high school that hacking is cool. And it wasn't even illegal. It was 1979. They didn't have the first computer crime law in 1984. So I started in an era where it was encouraged to do this stuff because it was like no harm, no foul. I wasn't stealing passwords because I want to get in their accounts. It was more like just for doing it. So it was kind of like a cool thing. The teacher liked it.
So do you still have this deep passion today?
I hack every day. But there's only one difference. I have authorization. So companies that hire me to break into their systems give me a get out of jail free card. And as long as I have that card in my pocket, I feel really comfortable. And I still get to do the same thing I was doing 20 years ago today. And the techniques still work, like social engineering. I mean, the technical exploits change. As we build more complex systems, it creates more vulnerabilities, as you know. So you have the technical side, which now you could download Metasploit. You have commercial products like Canvas and Core. Metasploit is awesome. I don't know how many of you know of Metasploit here in the audience, but these tools weren't available when I was hacking. It was like you had to do it on your own. There was no frameworks, not where you can go and Google. Google didn't exist, by the way. I couldn't Google exploits. It was all on your own. And today, I mean, what kids can do, which I didn't have this option, was they could have open source Linux boxes for next to nothing. They could get access to frameworks like Metasploit, so they could experiment and have fun hacking, legitimately. And I didn't have this option when it just didn't exist. So what I chose to do was go to universities, all the Cal State universities in Los Angeles, and until I wore out my welcome, right? And all the Radio Shacks in Los Angeles, yeah.
Great. We have a couple microphones. If you could just raise your hand, a microphone will come to you.
Somebody hacked your mic.
I don't need a mic, I'm loud enough. I had a free Kevin sticker on my lap door at AT&T. So, did you ever use the name Nasta?
No, that was a myth.
Because a friend of mine got arrested at CFP.
Yeah, I heard about that. They thought he was me, and they arrested him when I was a fugitive, unfortunately. And then I guess they thought I was using his name. I never used it. The names I used was Eric Weiss, Brian Merrill. They're all in my book. The names I used. It was a handful, but never his name. Never even talked. I never even knew the guy. So that again was another myth. Tell him it wasn't me. Yeah. They also arrested another guy who they thought was the informant in my case. A guy named Eric Hines. His real name's Justin Peterson. And they actually were almost going to arrest I think Robert Steele, who's an ex-CIA agent who does a lot of talks at conferences. The agents actually asked him to pick up his pants on one leg because the real Justin had a prosthetic leg, and they were almost going to arrest him because they're just going crazy. They wanted to arrest somebody, but they kept getting the wrong people. Any other questions? Yes.
With the
No.
Just speak loud.
right. With everybody getting so connected, I mean, that's kind of what we do here, making sure that everybody's connected and everything's accessible to everybody as much as possible. Is security intractable for regular people? I mean, I know that social engineering always worked and probably always will work, but you can get so much further with it now because you can, send out
Spear phishing.
Yeah, you can try and scam 10 million people at a clip. Is this an intractable problem that we're just going to be in this situation forever?
No, I don't really know. I mean, I look at the solutions to social engineering as using technology whenever possible to take the decision making out of the human actor's hand, so to speak, and then training in a lot of training and education. A lot of the don't forget the social engineering usually also relies on some technical vulnerability, like an older version of Adobe Acrobat, that the person's using. So, I mean, by keeping the technology up to date, I think you mitigate the social engineering, because if you look, most of the attack vectors today are client-side. So you're looking to exploit the browser, you're looking to exploit Adobe Acrobat, Flash, Java, the media players, the instant messaging tools. So I find that a lot of my clients, they're not keeping that stuff up to date. And that's how I'm able to exploit them. I just had a client, multi-million-dollar client, and they were running like version, I think 9.1 of Adobe. And how I found, what I did was I used social networking to create my target list on LinkedIn. It's so, it's easy. You can even use Google, of course. But you try to look for network administrators and engineers and people that are likely have domain admin rights, and you target those people first, right? So I was able to, I found out who this administrator works with at one of the companies that supports one of their IT functions, and emailed him a PDF that had an exploit in it. He opened it up, and I was able to get into his box. He had domain admin rights, and the game was over. I mean, it was just that easy. If he had an updated version of Adobe at the time, because the problem was patched, maybe the social engineering side would have worked, but it wouldn't have got me anywhere. Right?
Push your clients to Chrome OS or Chrome.
I use Chrome. I shouldn't tell you this, because now maybe I could be a target.
One last question. Let's give somebody. Oh, go ahead.
So you mentioned writing a hello world program.
Right.
And you mentioned how your teacher kind of encouraged you to, it was encouraged to hack, and it was cool.
Well, it was after I wrote the first program, because I didn't tell the teacher what I was doing during that development.
So I'm curious if you feel that education for developers has changed in any regard, because I still find that when we're trying to get people into computers and development, we still kind of go, look how easy this is. Print hello world. Great, you wrote your first program. It's really easy. Well, we don't build on a stronger foundation of, oh, well, here's the building blocks and security.
Well, absolutely. I mean, most of the time where our methodology, most of the time where we're able to get into a client's infrastructure is usually by exploiting a web app. Usually it's something like SQL injection. And so if the developers of those applications, sanitize their input, we wouldn't be able to get in, at that point. So I find that there's a lot of low-hanging fruit out there. There's lots of internet-facing web applications that are insecure and easy to exploit. I mean, case in point is you have like lulsec, right? They're out exploiting everybody in the world. They're doing some stupid attacks with DDoS attacks, but all the other victims are, simple SQL injection. Look at Sony; they were hacked 12 times, and I think like 10 of those hacks were SQL injection hacks, right? So the developers obviously, they either bought the code from somebody else, bought the application from a third party who obviously didn't have secure coding practices, in their development cycle, or they did it in-house, and it was just shoddy security and got hacked.
So I guess the question is then, why hasn't education changed for developers? Or
well, they have it available. It's just the question of companies actually using it in their development cycle.
Companies and schools, right? Why?
Right. Oh, school.
Liability laws the liabilities are in the wrong place. Credit cards used to be,
the thing that enabled the problem is that the liability laws are in the wrong place. When credit cards first came out, there was a question of who has to pay for the fraud.
Right.
And the answer was the user has to pay for the fraud, and so users didn't want it. And then when the law said the bank has to pay for the fraud, there's 50,
right.
both the user, or it was either the user or the merchant, but somebody, if the user has to pay for the fraud, the users don't want it. So they say, well, let's make the merchants pay for the fraud, and the merchants don't want it. So they made the bank pay for the fraud. All of a sudden, the liability and the incentives are in the right place, and the banks fought against it. They said, oh no, you can't make us pay for the fraud. It's not our fault, and the law just said, well, pay for it anyway. Which sudden the bank said, oh, all right. At which point, credit cards had this amazing round of growth, because the bank said, okay, well, we'll cut down the fraud to a level that that people are willing to pay for in the interest rate. And so it's really just liability.
Right. I mean, and I think today it's on the merchant, actually, is the fraud. I mean, unless, Visa and MasterCard, if you go through secure code, they have, if you, what is the product called? MasterCard Secure Code and Visa Verified. If you go through those mechanisms, then the bank takes the risk. But I think today it's the merchant. It still takes the risk on transactions, right?
Hey, Kevin, I think we're going to broadcast this, so maybe just parting thoughts,
Oh yeah, we're recorded.
inspiring hackers or security researchers, for somebody that's been there, done that, been behind bars.
I mean, I just love what I do. I mean, my primary reason for getting involved in hacking was the intellectual curiosity, the challenge, and most importantly, the learning. And I wanted to learn everything that I possibly could. And I still have those drivers today. When I'm testing my client's security, I still get that endorphin rush when I'm able to find a security hole. So I really enjoy what I do. It's almost like, it's almost like not working. But I mean, my recommendations is if you're developing applications, is that you do use secure coding practices so people like me can't get in. You can make our pen tests harder. Yeah. And I guess unless you have any other questions, I don't know what else to say.
Check out the book.
Oh yeah, book. Why am I here? Ghost in the Wires. I mean, you get a lot more detail about what had happened, why I did it, how I did things. That's in the book. Again, it was a two-year project. I told Bill what I wanted this book to be was like a catch me if you can thriller. So we were able to take my story because of all the crazy stuff I did as a kid, and I thought we actually met the goal. And I'd love to hear your feedback. You'll have my email address on my card. If you like the book, dislike it, find an error, let me know. I definitely would appreciate it. And I love Google. Google is my homepage on my browser, and I do use Google Chrome. And I love touring your campus in Mountain View. It was awesome. It was like a little city. So I think you guys are working for a great company. So thank you for being here. And I have business cards for everybody. I didn't run out. I just wanted to kill some time until Eran came and was ready to interview. So
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.